until we are able to resume meeting together on our church property. Wanted to use this opportunity to provide a what I would like for it to be is a conversational, at least conversational in tone, video each week or on each Wednesday. We've been trying in our church family to figure out some things, especially one of them being Wednesday night. The traditional model of things like a prayer meeting in the way that it had been done typically in the past, or Bible study in the way it had been done in the past on Wednesday night, just was not working. And that's quite okay. That's not anybody saying that we don't want to pray or that we're not studying our Bible. It's just that that particular mode of doing it for our church family was not effective. So, as you might know, over the last 6 or so weeks on Wednesday nights, for those who are available, we actually have been meeting in this office where I am now and talking about worship. And we had several things that were kind of on our radar concerning worship. And I was just so proud that over time we were able to address some issues that many churches never are able to address without just feuding with each other and things falling apart. But I'm very grateful for those who have been able to come out and those who have been part of the conversation. What I'm most grateful about is, first of all, the fact that so many people were responding. If you haven't been in this office, it's a very nice size office, but you put more than 8 to 10 people in here, it feels pretty full. Well, on several of those Wednesday nights, we had just over 20 people. So we had people sitting everywhere that you could imagine, even had people sitting on the desk or standing at the door. And one of the things that we enjoyed, or I enjoyed in that context, is that we actually felt like family because we were so close together. And there were people, as anticipated and as desired, with very different perspectives and viewpoints and different things to say. And what was just so cool about that is that when we were together in a place where we had freedom to talk, where we could listen to each other, where we could explore some new ideas, where we could say, things that might be difficult or not so easy to say, or things I wouldn't want to, for us to be talking about or saying in a worship service, that there was just a beautiful sense of fellowship and honesty, and we felt ourselves making some very good progress. So not only, did we have the sense of, boy, this is what it feels like when we're like family, that began to transfer over into our worship services. And I can't tell you how grateful I am that there's a sense in which we are able, or have chosen, to sit together and to be more of a family together in worship. And that makes a huge difference. If you've ever stood on the platform at the sanctuary and looked out on Sunday morning, it is really, really difficult to try to communicate, whether it's singing or preaching or doing whatever we do in that context, because we're overwhelmed with emptiness of a large building. But when we're able to get together and be together, all of a sudden we're able to shrink the impact that the facility has and the building has, and it really enriches our worship. I've had several people tell me that they could certainly feel the difference and tell the difference. I can certainly sense the difference, and I'm certainly very grateful for that, and that we've kind of made some of those adjustments. Another thing that has really been helpful is watching how our conversation has been moving from our initial meeting concerning the worship of topic, from our worship preferences, and then as we talked about different things that different people prefer in worship, we were able to take that discussion and move it from this is what we prefer to this is what God desires. Now, obviously, that, depending upon our preferences, could be a smaller or greater gap. But whatever the size of that gap is, I have been so delighted that we are having conversation about is worship going to be designed around what our personal preferences are? And personal preferences in themselves are perfectly fine. We certainly all have them, and I have mine, you have yours. But are we going to design our worship experiences around those preferences, or are we going to design worship around what God desires and trying to discern what that is? And rather than it being about what we particularly like or what we particularly do not like, thinking about the others who are also in the context of worship. What is it that is not only blessing the heart of God, but maybe somebody who's sitting up a few pews from you or behind you, around you, whatever, maybe their perspective and their preferences are very different than mine or yours. So I've really enjoyed watching us be able to take the conversation of worship and move it from where most churches are stuck, and it would be dangerous for them to even try to get unstuck, to move it from our personal preferences to what honors God, to what blesses God, to what glorifies God, to what God would desire in worship. Along the way, we were working on designing and developing what worship would look like on Palm Sunday. Well, as you know, we will not be meeting on Palm Sunday, and there has been a lot of energy, a lot of creativity, a lot of work into what that would look like. So even if we never do or execute what we have been talking about, nothing at all has gone to waste. If anything, it has helped all of us to see that the planning of a worship service can, when it involves a lot of people, really calls forth a great deal of creativity, and it's fun when you have 20 people, in the sense that there are a lot of ideas. And it's challenging to try to get all of those ideas out, to figure out which of those ideas work in that particular setting or that service. What are some creative things? What are some fresh things that we can do? What are different ways that we can have a very high level of congregational participation so that you could be more involved and you could have a greater part and a greater sense in that worship. So we have had several of our Wednesday nights dedicated to the design and development of that particular worship service. But the things that we were able to talk about, those will last for a very long time. The very fact that a good number of people, a large group, could enter into that conversation will be very, very helpful, very, very meaningful. And if anything, it enriches our personal preparation for worship each week. So I'm deeply grateful for those who are available and those who made time to kind of hang out with us on Wednesday night and talk about worship. For the next several Wednesday nights, I would like to just take the topic of church in a broader sense and just explore that. I know, we can't do the feedback and have the open exchange in this way that we were used to in my office, but when we do get back together, it will be the conversation that we will pursue, and we can have a very open exchange about that in the weeks ahead. But right now, I'll just kind of lay out the foundation over how many weeks we're going to have, and just provide that to you, and you can kind of reflect on it and perhaps begin thinking about how you hear God speaking to you, what your thoughts are, and when we all get together, we'll just continue our Wednesday night conversation for the rest of the spring. The topic about church obviously is a huge topic, but it is a topic that a lot of people are having to revisit. About 20, just a little over 20 years ago, actually, I had to revisit the whole idea in my own life. And it was something I just didn't sit around and think about. It was something that I knew God was kind of pressing in on me. I could feel it. I had been to seminary, been through graduate school. I had been prepped and trained for the kind of church that I was raised in, which was a large church that was highly functioning and was healthy, and just had huge programs. And that's the kind of vision that I was familiar with. The marks of success, or the signs of success for a church like that, would be the obvious things that people still talk about. There would be how many people come, and I was used to worship in a really lively setting, and the church was packed out. And obviously that's certainly a metric of success. Other measures of success would be how many programs and how many people were involved in those programs, how many people were joining the church, how financially healthy the church was, and how many people were giving, and all of those kinds of things. And if a church was going to be able to go into a building program, all of those things just spelled success in that world. That world that most of us are probably most familiar with was a world which kind of centered around what we would call the institutional church. It was a church-centric world. In other words, it was in that world that for a good number of decades, when a church came to a community, or a new church started, or a church built something, that people in the community just naturally resonated and showed up. And it was a culture, a church-friendly culture. But as you can see in today's world, the culture is not the church culture, church-friendly culture that a lot of us were used to and acclimated toward in years past. And when God started working in my own life in this, I had no idea at that time how big that conversation would be, and how impactful it would be in my own life. The larger picture of all of this is quite simple. The details you could talk about forever. But the vision of what I was beginning to experience, and what I felt like God's Spirit was saying, was that there are two pictures of the church, two visions that people hold primarily. One is the vision of the institutionalized church. That is a church with its building, its structure, its programs, its staff, and measuring all of the things that I mentioned to you just a moment ago as ways to determine if that church is being successful. And ultimately, it's a very institutional vision that approximates other institutional visions in our culture. So wherever you see any other form of institution, perhaps like government or military or business, the church began a number of years ago to mirror the institutionalism that it saw around its doors and outside of the church. And the church began to think, we can take the best practices of successful institutions and just kind of import them into a church, and we'll have a successful church. Well, that vision of church did work for a while, but the truth is, in the grand sweep of things, it was a fairly short-termed vision of the church. And I knew that as God was speaking, I just felt like every day during that particular season in my life some years ago, it was like every day was like fresh revelation to me about church. Over against the institutional vision of the church was the church that is like an organism. That is, the church is a living being, a living entity. It has life, it has breath, it has movement. It's not a static building with a structure, with programs that fit inside of it. It is just like our bodies are, just like we are. We are living beings. We are living organisms. The church is the same thing. It is the living organism. It is the living presence of Jesus in our world. And rather than just being an institution that sits on a particular place or owns a particular plot of land or meets in a particular building, and all those, there's nothing wrong with those things at all. But that a church must be able to realize that it does not exist to be an institution. It exists to be an organism. And as that new, fresh way of thinking began to grow in me, I realized that certainly I was not the only person. There were voices scattered here and there all about who were having the same kinds of experiences and obviously began to kind of lean into those voices and hear those voices. And a couple of them early on in the game were some people that God has used mightily over these years and continue to still use in a powerful way. One of those individuals was a guy by the name of Reggie McNeil. He was a Southern Baptist working in South Carolina, served as a church consultant and someone who studied the trends of the church. And he wrote some of the very best stuff, and still is writing some of the very best stuff on this conversation. So if you have a chance to check it out, one of his earlier books is this, The Present Future. And the subtitle is 6 Tough Questions for the Church. Now, what is so good about this kind of thing is that the questions that he asks, or he puts before us that we simply have to face, are very, very legitimate questions. They are the issues that people often dance around. They are the things that a lot of us kind of know in our hearts, but to put it out there and to talk about it, it could be dangerous. A lot of my pastor friends would not be comfortable at all doing that because they would know that they would probably be dismissed or fired for raising the topic. I'm glad that that's not something that's we're concerned about at Ivy, right? So, but it allows us the opportunity to raise the issues, talk about them, talk through them, pray through them, work together, and just forge a future together that will not come unless we have those kinds of conversations, unless we do that kind of hard work, unless we are in touch at that level of being able to engage each other at the deepest part of our heart and our mind, our reading of Scripture, our various experiences, and all those kinds of things. So I'll be sharing with you some of the things that Reggie has been sharing. One of the statements that he made that probably helped propel this particular book to really quick national prominence was his opening line. See if this resonates with you. His very first words: "The current church culture in North America is on life support. It is living off the work, money, and energy of previous generations from a previous world order." That says a lot. And being able to start there with acknowledging and confessing that churches, the institutional church in our culture, is indeed on life support, and the resources for sustaining it are diminishing on a daily basis. But that does not mean that God is doing less. As a matter of fact, and it will be a handful of churches. Many churches will not be able to have this conversation, but we will at Ivy. We will be able to get it out, to talk about this, and to open ourselves up to a conversation that allows us to really explore areas that are going to seem perhaps foreign to us in some ways, and will be new to us, will be challenging, and it's going to really up the game on our faith. The bottom line is simple. We simply cannot do things in the future like we've done them in the past. I think everybody knows that whatever the future looks like, it does look significantly different than the past. So it will be interesting to see how we can navigate that, and how we can just come before God and come to each other and do that. So a book that, another one of Reggie McNeil's, one that I'll also be drawing from quite a bit, will be this one, a book called Missional Renaissance, Changing the Scorecard of the Church. And that is really just an image playing off the entire idea that the church is somehow needs to move from being an institution to be an organism of Jesus, from thinking about just doing institutional stuff to what would a living organism of Jesus look like in our community and in our day, kinds of things. In order to do that, you've got to change the scorecard. And I've already mentioned to you the basics of the scorecard that we are all accustomed to. And those are the bottom line things, the things that we measure, the things that we determine whether we're succeeding. Our attendance, our growth, our budget, all of those things are scorecard issues for the institutional church. The scorecard for a church that is beginning or learning how to live as an organism of Jesus in the world is going to really look different, and it's going to be hard having these conversations, but it's going to be fun, and it's going to be exciting. It's going to pull out some things with all of us we didn't even know were there, and it's going to open up the opportunity for God's Spirit to do something that we probably didn't think, and perhaps didn't even foresee happening. And when that begins to unfold, we're going to see a shifting in the scorecard. What is it that we measure? What is it that really counts? I want to know, just as you want to know, when God looks down, what is it that is significant to Him? And as a follower of Jesus Christ, I want to live my life doing the things and being the things that are significant to God. What does He want us to do? How does He want us to partner with Him on His redemptive mission in the world? So that's going to be a good conversation, and it's going to stretch us, but it will stretch us to the place that is going to make us different. And it will be the place from which God has taken all the wonderful past of Ivy, and we're just going to put it in His hands. And however He molds and fashions that, out will come this future. And I just want to live long enough to be able to see and celebrate what all of that is going to look like. And so we'll enter the conversation. So I'm just going to mention to you in broad fashion three of the huge shifts that are involved in having that conversation, and these will be the shifts that are mentioned in Reggie's book. And by the way, I will have the opportunity, along with 8 of my colleagues throughout the state of Virginia, to have 2.5 days of just sitting down with Reggie in the first week of April. We'll be meeting together, and just for 2+ days solid, we are just going to be engaging in conversation, the kinds of things we're talking about, and have a chance to really pick Reggie's heart and to glean from his incredible insights and his story. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'll be happy to report to you, and I'll be sharing with you what emerges and what kinds of things arise out of those conversations. But as the conversation begins to unfold, here are the 3 big areas that we'll focus on. I'm just going to mention them to you now, but the conversation for these will be another day. These are the shifts, the move or the shift from thinking internally to external when we think about ministry. The whole purpose of that will be that when we use a word like ministry, our first thoughts will not be about all of the things that we do necessarily within the context or in the walls of our church, but more and more and more, when we use the word ministry, we'll be able to talk about the things that God is doing outside the walls of the church and how we are a part of that story. A second big shift that we'll be talking about is moving from developing programs to developing people. Very simply, when Jesus called the disciples, He didn't put them into a discipleship program. He just showed them how to live as a disciple. And I know that sounds simple, but oftentimes we get kind of overtaken by what we're trying to manage and what we're trying to accomplish in programs. And when we're not careful, we do programs that help people, that make people good, or even make church members better, but really don't make disciples. So one of the big shifts that we'll be talking about is how do we invest ourselves in such a way that we're not talking about programmatic survival. We are talking about authentic discipleship in Christ, and what a disciple looks like, what a disciple does, what a disciple acts like, and what a life of discipleship looks like, and what a community of disciples looks like. So I look forward to that. And then finally, the third big shift will be from being church-based to being kingdom-based. In other words, it'll be a shift from what is the center of our world. Oftentimes, for those of us who've been in church for a good bit of life, the church is the central focus of who we are and what we do. And the more the world is church-centric, the less it will be world-centric. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Not that God so loved the church, which he does, but God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. The purpose of the church is to situate itself in the world as a place that God's mission to the world can flow. Now, God's not confined to the church. He's doing stuff that has nothing to do with the church. He's touching people who have no church connections whatsoever. And so the shift is, can we move from thinking about life where the church is the central focus and it consumes most of our effort and our time and our energy? Can we make the shift from being church-centric to kingdom-centric? Thinking about where we see the kingdom of God. What is God doing in his kingdom? And God hasn't slowed down or shut down or canceled anything just because coronavirus is here. So God is active. God is moving. God is doing stuff all around us, all in the community, all throughout the world. And I look forward to whatever that journey for us is going to look like in moving to becoming a kingdom-centric church. So that's a lot of stuff. But that's stuff that I'm just going to invite you, when we gather again, we will have these conversations here. In the meantime, each Wednesday, we'll use a format like this, and I will just begin working out some of these concepts and ideas with you, and look forward to your feedback and your participation. So thank you for tuning in for a little bit today. We're praying that God will bless you, and God will give you great creativity, imagination, and just great faith as we seek to walk with him in whatever his future is for us. Thank you.